Welcome, my dearest scandal seekers, to yet another revelation that will rattle the chandeliers of Mayfair and crack the porcelain teacups of the ton. Today's tale is not about a forbidden affair or a misplaced inheritance. No. This one cuts deeper. It's about a mother who, faced with her daughter's tears, responded not with comfort, but with cold, calculated silence. A silence so sharp, it could slice through silk. And before anyone dares to whisper, but every mother loves her child, I must ask, are we speaking of mothers or mere titles? Because in this story, there is love neither spoken nor shown. Just a girl, crying, and a woman who turned away as if love was beneath her. The year was 1815, and London's high society existed as a glittering facade concealing an intricate web of deception, scandal, and forbidden desires. Within the marble halls of Mayfair's grandest mansions, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across polished floors, the aristocracy performed their elaborate dance of social propriety, while harboring secrets that could topple kingdoms. The Regency era had ushered in an age of unprecedented extravagance and moral complexity. Beneath the surface of perfectly orchestrated dinner parties and meticulously choreographed ballroom waltzes lay a world where reputation was currency, scandal was destruction, and knowledge was the ultimate weapon. The Ton, as London's elite society called itself, operated under an unspoken understanding that certain truths must never see the light of day. In the opulent drawing rooms of Grosvenor Square, where silk wallpaper adorned walls lined with portraits of distinguished ancestors, whispered conversations carried more weight than parliamentary debates. Here, in these sanctuaries of privilege, marriages were arranged like military campaigns, financial ruin was hidden behind elaborate masquerades, and moral transgressions were buried beneath layers of social protocol. The Duke of Ravensholm's mansion stood as the epitome of Georgian architectural magnificence. Its soaring columns, imported from Italian quarries, supported a facade that had witnessed 3 generations of political machinations and romantic scandals. Within its walls, servants moved like silent ghosts, their footsteps muffled by Persian carpets worth more than most men's annual income. The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like secrets waiting to be discovered. Lady Margaret Ashworth, the Duke's youngest sister, stood before her vanity mirror in her private chambers, her reflection revealing a woman of 24 years whose beauty was matched only by her intelligence. Her auburn hair, arranged in the fashionable style of the era, caught the morning sunlight as her lady's maid, Sarah, fastened a strand of pearls around her graceful neck. These pearls, inherited from her grandmother, had once graced the court of King George II, carrying with them stories of intrigue and passion that Margaret could only imagine. The morning ritual of dressing was a ceremony unto itself. Sarah carefully laced Margaret's corset, the whalebone structure that would define her silhouette for the day ahead. Over this foundation, they layered a chemise of the finest Belgian lace, followed by a morning dress of pale blue silk that complemented Margaret's eyes. Every detail was considered, from the delicate embroidery on her gloves to the precise angle of her bonnet's ribbon. "My lady," Sarah whispered, her voice carrying the caution that servants learn to employ when discussing sensitive matters. "There are whispers among the staff about last evening's gathering at the Pemberton estate." Margaret's reflection showed no change in expression, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of interest. The Pemberton family had long been pillars of society, their reputation seemingly unassailable. Lord Pemberton served on the King's Council, while Lady Pemberton was renowned for her charitable works among London's poor. Yet Margaret had learned that in their world, the most virtuous facades often concealed the darkest secrets. The previous evening's soirée had been attended by the cream of London society. In the grand ballroom of Pemberton House, where mirrors lined the walls to create an illusion of infinite space, couples had waltzed to the melodic strains of a string quartet. The ladies, resplendent in gowns of silk and satin, had moved across the polished floor like living works of art, their jewels catching the light from 1,000 candles arranged in silver candelabras. Margaret had observed the intricate social dynamics with the practiced eye of someone born into this world. She had watched as Lord Pemberton's eldest son, Charles, paid particular attention to Miss Victoria Thornton, the daughter of a wealthy merchant recently elevated to the peerage. The match would be advantageous for both families, combining old nobility with new money in a union that strengthened both their positions in society's hierarchy. Yet Margaret had also noticed the subtle glances exchanged between Charles and Lady Eleanor Fitzwilliam, a married woman whose husband was frequently absent on diplomatic missions to the continent. These stolen moments of connection, hidden behind fans and flower arrangements, spoke of a passion that defied social conventions and threatened to destroy carefully constructed reputations. The complexity of these relationships extended far beyond simple romance. In Regency society, marriage was often a business transaction disguised as a love match. Families negotiated settlements, dowries, and property transfers with the same precision that merchants used to arrange trade agreements. Love, if it existed at all, was expected to develop after the wedding ceremony, not before. Margaret's own position in this elaborate social structure was both privileged and precarious. As the sister of a duke, she commanded respect and deference from those of lower rank. Her dowry was substantial, her bloodline impeccable, and her education thorough. She spoke French fluently, played the pianoforte with skill, painted watercolors that graced the drawing room walls, and could discourse knowledgeably on literature, history, and natural philosophy. However, at 24, Margaret was approaching what society considered the dangerous territory of spinsterhood. Most young ladies of her class were married by 20, bearing their first children by 22. With each passing season, the whispers grew more pointed, the speculation more intense. Some suggested she was too particular in her standards, others hinted at secret attachments that prevented her from accepting suitable proposals. The truth was far more complex than society's gossips could imagine. Margaret had received numerous offers of marriage, each from gentlemen of impeccable breeding and substantial fortune. She had declined them all, not from romantic notions of true love, but from a growing awareness that marriage would limit her freedom to pursue interests that fascinated her far more than domestic tranquility. Her private study, hidden away on the third floor of Ravensholm House, contained books that would scandalize the very ladies who praised her accomplishments at tea parties. Volumes of philosophy, political theory, and scientific inquiry lined the shelves alongside romantic novels and poetry collections. She corresponded with learned men across Europe, her letters discussing everything from agricultural improvements to astronomical observations. This intellectual curiosity had led Margaret to develop an unusual hobby that would have horrified her family if they had discovered it. She had become an observer and chronicler of society's hidden truths, maintaining detailed journals that recorded the secrets she uncovered through careful observation and strategic conversation. The morning's correspondence brought news that would prove more significant than Margaret could have anticipated. Among the usual invitations to dinner parties and charity events lay a letter written on expensive parchment, sealed with black wax bearing an unfamiliar crest. The handwriting was elegant but disguised, suggesting an educated hand attempting to conceal its identity. "Lady Margaret," the letter began, "your reputation for discretion and intelligence has come to my attention. There are matters concerning our shared society that require the attention of someone with your particular talents. If you are willing to learn truths that others fear to acknowledge, attend the masquerade ball at Blackwood Manor tomorrow evening. Look for the lady in the silver mask adorned with black pearls. She will recognize you by the blue ribbon in your hair." The letter was unsigned, but the implications were clear. Someone had been watching Margaret, studying her habits and interests. The knowledge was both thrilling and terrifying. In a world where reputation was everything, being associated with mystery and intrigue could prove either advantageous or ruinous. Margaret's decision to attend the masquerade would set in motion events that would reshape not only her own destiny, but the entire structure of London's high society. The mask she would wear that evening would become both a disguise and a revelation, concealing her identity, while revealing truths that had long been hidden in the shadows of aristocratic propriety. Blackwood Manor stood at the edge of London proper, its Gothic architecture creating an atmosphere of mystery that made it the perfect venue for clandestine gatherings. The estate had been in the Blackwood family for 3 centuries, its current owner, Lord Sebastian Blackwood, being a man whose own reputation balanced precariously between respectability and scandal. He was known for hosting gatherings that pushed the boundaries of social convention, while never quite crossing the line into outright impropriety. The evening of the masquerade arrived with a dramatic thunderstorm that seemed to underscore the ominous nature of the gathering. Rain lashed against the manor's diamond-paned windows as carriages arrived in steady succession, depositing their mysterious occupants at the covered entrance. The servants who received the guests wore masks themselves, adding to the atmosphere of anonymity that pervaded the evening. Margaret's carriage, bearing the Ashworth coat of arms, joined the procession of vehicles winding up the circular drive. She had chosen her costume with careful consideration, selecting a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her mask, crafted by London's most skilled artisan, was adorned with sapphires that caught the flickering torchlight as she moved. The blue ribbon in her hair, as specified in the mysterious letter, was woven with silver thread that created subtle patterns when viewed from different angles. The grand hall of Blackwood Manor had been transformed for the evening's festivities. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across walls hung with tapestries depicting medieval hunting scenes. Musicians, their faces hidden behind elaborate masks, played haunting melodies that seemed to echo the storm raging outside. The assembled guests moved through the space like phantoms, their identities concealed behind an array of masks ranging from simple dominoes to elaborate creations adorned with feathers, jewels, and precious metals. Margaret found herself studying each figure she encountered, searching for the woman described in the letter. The anonymity provided by the masks created an atmosphere unlike any social gathering she had previously attended. Without the usual visual cues of recognition, conversations took on a different quality. People spoke more freely, their words unguarded by the usual social constraints. A woman in an emerald gown whispered to her companion about a certain lord's gambling debts that threatened to bankrupt his estate. 2 gentlemen discussed a minister's secret meetings with foreign agents. A group of ladies shared gossip about a prominent family's attempts to conceal their daughter's pregnancy, the result of an affair with a married man. The information flowed like wine, intoxicating in its forbidden nature. Margaret realized that the masks had created a temporary suspension of the usual social order, allowing people to share secrets they would never dare voice in their normal social circles. The evening was becoming a confessional, where sins were shared as freely as dance partners. As the evening progressed, Margaret began to notice a figure who seemed to move through the gathering with unusual purpose. The woman wore a gown of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight on water, but it was her mask that drew attention. Crafted from silver filigree and adorned with black pearls, it covered the upper half of her face while leaving her lips visible. These lips, painted a deep crimson, seemed to smile with knowledge that others could only guess at. This mysterious figure engaged in conversations with various guests throughout the evening, each interaction brief but intense. Margaret observed that after speaking with the silver-masked woman, people seemed changed somehow, their posture different, their movements more cautious. It was as if the woman possessed some form of power that manifested itself through these brief encounters. The moment of contact came as Margaret stood near a window, watching the storm rage outside. A voice, cultured and melodious, spoke beside her. Lady Margaret Ashworth, sister to the Duke of Ravensholm, educated in the finest institutions, fluent in 3 languages, accomplished in music and art, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance. Margaret turned to find the silver-masked woman beside her. Those crimson lips curved in a knowing smile. The woman's voice carried an accent that was difficult to place, suggesting education in multiple countries and exposure to various courts. "You seem to know a great deal about me," Margaret replied, her own voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Yet I find myself at a disadvantage, knowing nothing of you save your striking appearance." The woman laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "Knowledge, my dear Margaret, is never equally distributed. Some of us make it our business to know, while others remain content to be known. I am called Lady Vesper by those who have reason to know my name." The name sent a chill through Margaret that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Lady Vesper was a figure of whispered legend in certain circles, spoken of in hushed tones as someone who possessed information that could topple governments and destroy dynasties. Some claimed she was a foreign spy, others suggested she was a blackmailer who preyed on the wealthy and powerful. A few insisted she was merely a myth, a composite figure created by overactive imaginations. "Your letter," Margaret began, but Lady Vesper raised a gloved hand to silence her. "Walk with me," Lady Vesper commanded, linking her arm through Margaret's with an intimacy that suggested long friendship rather than first meeting. "There are things you must see, truths that will either elevate you to heights you never imagined or destroy everything you believe about the world you inhabit." They moved through the gathering like sharks through water, Lady Vesper guiding their path with subtle precision. She stopped near a group of gentlemen engaged in heated discussion, positioning herself and Margaret close enough to overhear, while appearing to examine a portrait on the nearby wall. "The shipment from the Caribbean arrives next week," one man was saying, his voice low but urgent. "The authorities must be convinced to look the other way, as they have been convinced before." "The price has doubled since last year," another replied. "The risks are becoming too great, especially with Parliament growing more suspicious of our activities." Margaret realized they were discussing smuggling operations, likely involving goods that carried heavy import duties or were prohibited entirely. The gentlemen speaking were members of Parliament themselves, men whose public positions gave them the very authority they were conspiring to circumvent. Lady Vesper guided Margaret away, before they could be discovered eavesdropping, leading her to another cluster of guests where a different conversation was taking place. "The marriage contract has been signed," a woman was explaining to her companions, "but the groom remains unaware of his bride's condition. The child she carries is not his, though he will never have reason to suspect." "And the true father?" asked another woman. "A stable hand who has been relocated to our estate in Scotland. He believes he has received a promotion for exemplary service." The casual cruelty of the conversation shocked Margaret. They were discussing a young woman's life, as if she were a piece of property to be managed rather than a human being with feelings and dreams. The child would grow up believing a lie. The husband would unknowingly raise another man's offspring, and the stable hand would never know he had fathered a child. Throughout the evening, Lady Vesper continued this guided tour of London society's hidden corruption. They overheard discussions of bribery and political manipulation, learned of affairs that involved the highest levels of government, and witnessed the casual disposal of human lives in service of maintaining reputation and power. With each revelation, Margaret felt her understanding of her world shifting like sand beneath her feet. The society she had been raised to revere and serve was built upon foundations of deception and cruelty that extended far beyond anything she had imagined. The elegant manners and refined speech she had been taught to value were merely decorative coverings for a structure of systematic exploitation and moral bankruptcy. "Why are you showing me this?" Margaret asked as they paused in an alcove draped with dark velvet. Lady Vesper's crimson lips curved into a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Because, my dear Margaret, you have a choice to make. You can return to your comfortable ignorance, marry a suitable gentleman, bear his children, and live out your days as an ornament in society's drawing room. Or you can join me in my work, using your position and intelligence to gather the information that keeps the powerful in check. What exactly is your work? Margaret asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I am the keeper of secrets, the guardian of truths that others would prefer to remain hidden. When a minister considers selling state secrets to foreign powers, I ensure he remembers his loyalty to England. When a lord contemplates destroying a young woman's reputation to cover his own indiscretions, I remind him of the value of discretion. When corruption threatens to poison the very foundations of our society, I provide the antidote of exposure. The offer was both seductive and terrifying. To join Lady Vesper would mean gaining access to power beyond anything Margaret had imagined, the ability to influence events and protect the innocent from the predations of the corrupt. But it would also mean living a double life, maintaining her public persona while engaging in activities that could result in exile, or worse if discovered. I need time to consider, Margaret said, her voice barely audible above the music and conversation surrounding them. Of course, Lady Vesper replied. But do not take too long. Events are already in motion that will require your decision sooner than you might prefer. Tomorrow evening, attend Lady Pemberton's charity auction. Observe carefully, and you will see why your choice matters more than you realize. With those words, Lady Vesper melted back into the crowd, leaving Margaret alone with her thoughts and the weight of knowledge that could never be unlearned. The masquerade continued around her, but she no longer saw it as an amusing entertainment. Instead, it appeared as a metaphor for the entire society she inhabited, where everyone wore masks to conceal their true nature and intentions. The morning after the masquerade dawned gray and subdued, as if the very sky reflected Margaret's internal turmoil. She sat in her private study, staring at the rain-streaked windows while contemplating the choice that Lady Vesper had laid before her. The comfortable certainties of her previous existence had been shattered, replaced by knowledge that made her feel like a stranger in her own world. A knock at the door interrupted her brooding. Sarah entered with the morning's correspondence, her expression suggesting that something unusual had occurred. "My lady," Sarah said carefully, "there is a gentleman caller downstairs. Lord Alexander Thornfield has requested a private audience with you." Margaret's eyebrows rose in surprise. Lord Thornfield was a man of considerable reputation and mysterious background. The younger son of an earl, he had made his fortune through investments in shipping and manufacturing, endeavors that some considered beneath the dignity of true nobility. His wealth had purchased him acceptance in society, but whispers followed him wherever he went. What made Thornfield particularly intriguing was his reputation for discretion in matters of business and politics. It was said that he served as an intermediary for delicate negotiations, a man who could be trusted with sensitive information and dangerous secrets. Some claimed he worked directly for the crown in matters too sensitive for official channels. Margaret descended to the morning room, where she found Thornfield standing before the fireplace, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the window. He was a handsome man in his early 30s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most people revealed. His clothing was impeccably tailored but understated, suggesting confidence that required no ostentatious display. "Lord Thornfield," Margaret said as she entered, offering her hand in greeting. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" Thornfield took her hand and bowed over it with practiced grace, but Margaret noticed that his grip lingered slightly longer than propriety required. When he straightened, their eyes met with an intensity that sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Lady Margaret," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested time spent abroad, "I hope you will forgive my presumption in calling without prior arrangement. There are matters we must discuss that cannot wait for the usual social preliminaries." Margaret gestured for him to be seated while she took the chair opposite him, maintaining the proper distance required by convention, while feeling increasingly aware of the magnetic pull of his presence. "I attended the gathering at Blackwood Manor last evening," Thornfield continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "I observed your conversation with a certain lady whose reputation precedes her in ways that should concern any sensible person." The directness of his statement caught Margaret off guard. In her world, important subjects were approached through layers of subtle implication and careful indirection. Thornfield's willingness to speak plainly was both refreshing and alarming. "I am not certain I understand your meaning," Margaret replied, though they both knew she understood perfectly. Thornfield leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a tone that was both intimate and urgent. "Lady Vesper is a dangerous woman, Margaret. Her network of informants and influence extends throughout London's society and beyond. Those who become entangled in her web rarely escape unscathed." "You speak as if you know her personally," Margaret observed, studying Thornfield's expression for clues about his true purpose in visiting her. "I have had occasion to encounter her work," Thornfield admitted. "My business interests require me to be aware of various irregularities in London's commercial and political circles. Lady Vesper's activities often intersect with matters that concern the stability of our nation." Margaret felt a flutter of excitement at the implication that Thornfield might be involved in the same sort of shadow work that Lady Vesper had described. The possibility that he might understand the world she was being drawn into was both thrilling and terrifying. "Are you suggesting that I should avoid her company?" Margaret asked, testing the waters of his intentions. "I am suggesting," Thornfield said, rising from his chair and moving to stand before the window, "that if you are determined to enter that particular arena, you should not do so without understanding the full scope of what you are embracing." He turned back to face her, his expression serious. "There are forces at work in our society that extend far beyond the gossip and petty scandals that occupy most people's attention. Foreign agents seek to destabilize our government, criminal organizations corrupt our legal system, and individuals with vast wealth use their resources to manipulate outcomes in ways that serve their interests rather than those of England." Margaret rose and joined him at the window, drawn by the intensity of his words and the proximity of his presence. Standing beside him, she could smell the subtle scent of his cologne, a mixture of sandalwood and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken. "And what is your role in this shadow world?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thornfield turned to face her fully, his eyes searching her face as if trying to determine whether she could be trusted with the truth. "I serve His Majesty's government in capacities that cannot be officially acknowledged. My business ventures provide cover for activities that protect England's interests both at home and abroad." The revelation should have shocked Margaret, but instead she felt a sense of rightness, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. Thornfield's mysterious reputation, his ability to move between different levels of society, his knowledge of Lady Vesper's activities. It all made sense if he was indeed working as some form of unofficial agent for the Crown. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret asked, acutely aware of how close they were standing and how the conversation had created an atmosphere of intimate conspiracy between them. "Because," Thornfield said, reaching out to touch her hand gently, "I believe you are about to make a decision that will change your life forever. If you are determined to enter this world, I want you to do so with full knowledge of what it entails. And I want you to know that you need not face it alone." The touch of his hand sent electricity through Margaret's entire being. She had never experienced such an immediate and powerful attraction to any man, and the combination of physical desire with intellectual fascination was overwhelming. In that moment, she understood that her choice was not simply between safety and danger, but between a conventional life and one that would allow her to explore both her deepest desires and her highest aspirations. "Lady Pemberton's charity auction," she said, remembering Lady Vesper's instructions. "Will you be attending?" "I will now," Thornfield replied, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a gesture that was both gentle and possessive. "Perhaps we might arrive together? The evening promises to be quite revealing." Margaret's acceptance of his offer marked a turning point from which there would be no return. As their hands remained joined and their eyes met in shared understanding, she felt the last barriers of her conventional existence crumbling away. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with this remarkable man beside her. The afternoon passed in a haze of preparation and anticipation. Margaret chose her attire for the evening with special care, selecting a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her coloring while projecting an image of sophisticated confidence. Her jewelry was equally carefully chosen, emeralds that had belonged to her grandmother, pieces that carried their own history of secret meetings and passionate encounters. As evening approached, Margaret found herself in her study once more, but this time she was not brooding on difficult choices. Instead, she was writing in her journal, recording her thoughts and observations about the extraordinary events of recent days. The act of writing helped clarify her thinking and strengthen her resolve. When Thornfield's carriage arrived, Margaret was ready. As he handed her up into the vehicle, their eyes met in a moment of shared understanding that transcended words. The carriage interior was luxuriously appointed, with soft leather seats and crystal fixtures that spoke of both wealth and taste. More importantly, it provided privacy for conversation that would have been impossible in more public settings. "Tell me about Lady Pemberton's gathering," Margaret said as they made their way through London's evening traffic. "What am I likely to observe that Lady Vesper wishes me to see?" Thornfield's expression grew serious. The Pembertons have long been involved in charitable work, but their recent activities have attracted attention for reasons that have nothing to do with helping the poor. Tonight's auction is supposedly raising funds for an orphanage, but the money will actually be used to finance a very different sort of endeavor. Which is the transportation of French refugees to England, Thornfield explained. Normally, this would be a legitimate and praiseworthy activity. However, these particular refugees are not fleeing persecution. They are agents of the French government, sent to establish networks of influence and gather intelligence about British military and political activities. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The implications of what Thornfield was describing were staggering. If proven true, it would mean that one of London society's most respected families was actively working against British interests, using their reputation and social connections to facilitate espionage activities. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Suspicions have been growing for months," Thornfield replied. "But proof has been elusive. Lady Vesper's interest in recruiting you suggests that she believes your position in society might provide access to information that could confirm our suspicions." The carriage drew to a halt outside Pemberton House, and Margaret could see that the evening's gathering was already well underway. Lights blazed from every window, and the sound of music and conversation drifted out into the night. To any casual observer, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed to be: a charitable gathering of London's elite, come together to support a worthy cause. As Thornfield handed her down from the carriage, Margaret felt the weight of her new role settling upon her shoulders. She was no longer simply Lady Margaret Ashworth, youngest sister of a duke, attending a social gathering for entertainment. She had become an active participant in the shadow world of secrets and deception, working to protect her country from those who would use London society's trust and generosity for treacherous purposes. The evening ahead would test everything she thought she knew about herself and the world she inhabited. With Thornfield beside her and Lady Vesper's guidance still echoing in her mind, Margaret prepared to take her first steps into a life that would be far more dangerous and far more meaningful than anything she had previously imagined. Pemberton House blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, their warm glow reflecting off polished surfaces and creating an atmosphere of opulent celebration. The charity auction was being held in the grand ballroom, where paintings and precious objects donated by society's elite were displayed for the wealthy to bid upon. The assembled crowd represented the pinnacle of London society: dukes and duchesses, ministers and their wives, wealthy merchants seeking to purchase respectability through generous donations. Margaret entered on Thornfield's arm, her emerald gown rustling softly as they made their way through the crowd. She found herself observing the gathering with new eyes, seeing beneath the surface of polite conversation and charitable intentions to the undercurrents of power and influence that flowed through the room like an invisible river. Lady Pemberton, resplendent in burgundy silk and diamonds that caught the candlelight, presided over the proceedings with the grace of a born hostess. Her welcoming smile and warm greetings seemed genuine, but Margaret now found herself wondering what calculations lay behind those social pleasantries. How could a woman who had dedicated her life to charitable works also be facilitating activities that threatened England's security? The auction items themselves told their own story to those who knew how to read the signs. A collection of French porcelain, donated anonymously, bore markings that suggested recent acquisition rather than family inheritance. A series of landscape paintings depicted locations along England's coast with suspicious accuracy, as if they had been created for purposes other than artistic expression. Thornfield guided Margaret through the crowd with subtle purpose, positioning them where they could observe key interactions while appearing to be merely another couple enjoying the evening's festivities. His hand remained at her elbow, a point of contact that provided both comfort and communication as they navigated the complex social currents around them. The gentleman in the navy coat speaking with Lord Pemberton, Thornfield murmured near Margaret's ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine, is Monsieur Du Bois, ostensibly a wine merchant from Bordeaux. In reality, he coordinates the movement of French agents through English ports. Margaret studied the man Thornfield had indicated, noting his elegant bearing and the deference with which Lord Pemberton treated him. Du Bois seemed perfectly at home in London society, his English fluent and his manners impeccable. The realization that such a civilized and cultured individual could be working against British interests drove home the sophisticated nature of the threats they were facing. As the evening progressed, Margaret became aware of Lady Vesper's presence in the room, though the mysterious woman had dispensed with her signature silver mask for this gathering. Instead, she wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and her hair was arranged in an elaborate style that partially concealed her features. Only her distinctive crimson lips marked her as the same woman from the masquerade. Lady Vesper moved through the gathering like a predator stalking prey, engaging in brief conversations that left their targets visibly unsettled. Margaret watched as she approached a prominent member of Parliament known for his vocal support of increased military spending. After a few whispered words, the man's face went pale, and he excused himself from the gathering entirely. "She is cleaning house," Thornfield observed, following Margaret's gaze. "Removing those whose loyalty has become compromised or whose actions have attracted unwanted attention." The auction itself proceeded with all the pageantry expected of such events. The auctioneer, a distinguished gentleman with a commanding voice, presented each item with theatrical flair, while society's elite bid against each other with the casual attitude of those for whom money was merely a tool for acquiring desired objects. Margaret noticed that certain items attracted particularly intense bidding from specific individuals. A collection of maps, supposedly depicting historical trade routes, generated fierce competition between Du Bois and a man Thornfield quietly identified as a German agent operating under diplomatic cover. The final bid was astronomical, far exceeding any reasonable valuation of the map's historical or artistic merit. They are not bidding on maps, Margaret realized with sudden clarity. They are bidding on the information the maps contain. Precisely, Thornfield confirmed. The charity auction provides perfect cover for exchanging intelligence and making payments that would be suspicious in any other context. Who would question large sums changing hands at a charitable gathering? As the auction reached its climax, Lady Vesper appeared beside them as if materializing from shadow. In the crowded ballroom, her sudden presence went unnoticed by others, But Margaret felt the familiar chill of being in proximity to such concentrated power and knowledge. "Lady Margaret," Lady Vesper said, her voice barely audible above the auctioneer's enthusiastic descriptions, "the time has come for you to choose. What you witness tonight will determine whether you can be trusted with the responsibilities I offer." Before Margaret could respond, Lady Vesper had melted back into the crowd, leaving behind only the scent of exotic perfume and the weight of expectation. Margaret looked to Thornfield for guidance, but his attention was focused on a commotion near the auction platform. Lord Pemberton had taken the podium to announce the evening's final item, a small jewelry case that he claimed contained pieces donated by French royalty, who had fled the revolution. The case itself was unremarkable, but the bidding that followed was extraordinary. Sums were offered that could have purchased entire estates, and the tension in the room became palpable. Margaret watched as Lady Vesper approached the auction platform, her movement causing a subtle ripple of awareness through the crowd. She raised her fan to indicate a bid that exceeded all previous offers by a margin that drew gasps from the assembled guests. "Going once," the auctioneer called, his voice betraying nervousness at the astronomical sum involved. At that moment, Thornfield stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "I question the provenance of this item. The jewelry case bears markings that suggest it contains not historical artifacts, but contemporary correspondence of a sensitive nature." The room fell silent, the implications of Thornfield's words hanging in the air like smoke from a cannon blast. Lord Pemberton's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, and finally a calculated attempt at indignation. "Sir, I resent the implication that this charitable gathering would be used for any purpose other than helping those in need," Pemberton said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lady Vesper's crimson lips curved into a smile that was both beautiful and terrifying. "Perhaps Lord Thornfield would care to examine the case more closely? I am certain its contents would prove illuminating." The challenge hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Margaret realized that this was the moment Lady Vesper had been orchestrating, a public confrontation that would expose the true nature of the gathering while demonstrating the power she wielded over London's supposedly respectable society. Thornfield moved toward the platform with the confidence of a man who held the stronger hand. "I believe," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom, "that examination will reveal correspondence between French agents and certain members of British society, outlining plans to compromise our naval defenses and facilitate further infiltration of enemy operatives." The accusations hit the room like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, wine glasses were set down with trembling hands, and several guests moved quietly toward the exits. Margaret watched as the carefully constructed facade of civilized society crumbled to reveal the corruption and treachery that lay beneath. Lord Pemberton made one final attempt to maintain his position. "These accusations are outrageous and unfounded. I demand satisfaction for these insults to my honor and that of my family." Lady Vesper laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Your honor, my dear Pemberton, was sold to the highest bidder months ago. The only question now is whether you will face justice in British courts or disappear quietly to avoid the scandal that would destroy your family's name forever." The choice was no choice at all. Pemberton's shoulders sagged in defeat, the fight going out of him as he realized that his secret activities had been discovered and documented. Other guests who had been involved in the conspiracy began to understand that their own positions were equally compromised. Margaret found herself both exhilarated and terrified by the display of power she was witnessing. Lady Vesper had orchestrated the evening's events with masterful precision, using the gathering itself to expose the very corruption it was designed to facilitate. The revelation of treachery was devastating, but the demonstration of Lady Vesper's reach and influence was equally overwhelming. As chaos erupted around them, Thornfield took Margaret's arm and guided her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Now you understand," he said, his voice urgent but calm. the true nature of the choice before you. This world of shadows and secrets is seductive, but dangerous. Those who enter it rarely emerge unchanged. Margaret looked into his eyes, seeing her own excitement and fear reflected there. And if I choose to enter it, what becomes of us? Thornfield's answer was interrupted by the sound of coaches arriving outside. Official vehicles bearing the insignia of His Majesty's government. The evening's revelations would have immediate consequences, and those who had been exposed would face justice for their treasonous activities. In the midst of the chaos, Margaret made her decision. The conventional life she had known was already gone, destroyed by knowledge that could never be unlearned. Her choice was not whether to enter Lady Vesper's world, but how she would navigate it, and with whom she would share its dangers and rewards. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation at Pemberton House created ripples that spread through London society like cracks in breaking ice. Within hours, official carriages bearing representatives of His Majesty's government had arrived to take Lord Pemberton and several other conspirators into custody. The charity auction, which had begun as a glittering social event, ended with arrests that would be whispered about in drawing rooms for years to come. Margaret found herself in the extraordinary position of being both witness to and participant in events that would reshape the landscape of London's high society. As she sat in Thornfield's carriage in the early hours of morning, watching the last of the official vehicles depart from Pemberton House, she felt the weight of her transformation settling upon her like a cloak that could never be removed. The families involved will be given opportunities to distance themselves from the conspiracy, Thornfield explained as their carriage made its way through the empty London streets. Those who cooperated unknowingly will face social disgrace, but not legal consequences. However, their positions in society will be permanently altered. Margaret understood the implications. In their world, reputation was more valuable than money, and once lost, it could never be fully restored. The Pemberton name would become synonymous with treachery, their social connections severed, their influence destroyed. Children would grow up bearing the shame of their parents' choices, and marriages would be arranged with greater difficulty, due to the taint of association. And what of Lady Vesper? Margaret asked, realizing that the mysterious woman had vanished during the chaos of the evening's conclusion. She will return to the shadows from which she emerged, Thornfield replied. Her work continues, as does the network of individuals who assist her in protecting England from threats both foreign and domestic. The carriage drew to a halt outside Ravensholm House, but Margaret made no immediate move to disembark. The conversation with Thornfield had reached a crucial juncture, and she sensed that decisions made in the next few minutes would determine the course of her future life. Alexander, she said, using his given name for the first time, if I choose to accept Lady Vesper's offer, what becomes of what is growing between us? Thornfield turned to face her fully, his expression serious but tinged with an emotion that made her heart race. Margaret, what is growing between us exists precisely because we share this understanding of duty that transcends personal desire. In our world, love and loyalty must work in harmony rather than opposition. His words were both declaration and proposal, acknowledging the attraction that had developed between them while placing it within the context of their shared commitment to protecting England's interests. Margaret realized that he was offering her not just romantic partnership, but true partnership in every sense of the word. Then I accept, she said simply, the words carrying the weight of a vow that encompassed both Lady Vesper's offer and the future Thornfield was proposing. Their kiss, when it came, was both tender and urgent, sealing agreements that went far beyond the merely personal. In that moment, Margaret felt the last vestiges of her former existence falling away, replaced by a sense of purpose and possibility that was both thrilling and terrifying. The following weeks brought changes that would have seemed impossible just a month earlier. Margaret's education in the arts of intelligence gathering began immediately, conducted by Lady Vesper herself in a series of clandestine meetings held in locations carefully chosen for their privacy and security. The old Margaret Ashworth had been accomplished in the traditional feminine arts, music, painting, languages, and literature. The new Margaret who emerged from Lady Vesper's tutelage possessed these same accomplishments, but had learned to use them as tools for gathering and transmitting information. Her musical performances could carry coded messages, her paintings could document strategic locations, her linguistic skills could provide access to foreign correspondence, and her literary pursuits could create cover identities and false narratives. Lady Vesper proved to be a demanding but brilliant instructor. "Your greatest asset," she explained during one of their meetings in a safe house near the Thames, "is that society already knows you. You have established relationships and accepted positions that provide access to information that others could only dream of obtaining." The instruction extended beyond practical skills to include the psychological aspects of intelligence work. Margaret learned to read facial expressions and body language, to detect deception and hidden motivations, to manipulate conversations in ways that encouraged people to reveal more than they intended. She discovered that many of the social skills she had learned as a lady of quality could be adapted for purposes their original instructors never imagined. "The art of extracting secrets," Lady Vesper taught, "lies not in dramatic confrontations, but in making people feel comfortable enough to speak freely. A well-timed compliment, a sympathetic expression, a moment of apparent vulnerability, these are the tools that unlock tongues and open hearts." Margaret's relationship with Thornfield deepened as they worked together on various assignments. Their courtship, conducted under the cover of conventional social interaction, provided perfect camouflage for meetings and information exchanges. To the outside world, they appeared to be a properly matched couple progressing through the expected stages of romance and engagement. In private, their partnership extended far beyond romantic attachment. Thornfield shared with Margaret the full scope of his work for the Crown, revealing a network of agents and informants that extended throughout British society and beyond. Some were motivated by patriotism, others by money, and still others by the excitement of living double lives in service of causes larger than themselves. The French networks we exposed at Pemberton House were only one tentacle of a much larger creature, Thornfield explained during one of their private meetings. Napoleon's defeat did not end French ambitions for dominance in Europe, and British commercial success has created enemies among those whose interests we threaten. Margaret's first independent assignment came sooner than she had expected. Intelligence had been received suggesting that a prominent member of Parliament was considering selling information about British troop movements to agents of a foreign power. The man in question, Lord Henley, was known for his gambling debts and increasingly desperate financial situation. "Your task," Lady Vesper explained, "is to determine the truth of these allegations and, if they prove founded, to gather evidence that can be used to prevent the transaction without exposing our knowledge of it." The assignment required Margaret to attend a series of social gatherings where Lord Henley would be present, to engage him in conversation, and to assess both his intentions and his vulnerabilities. It was delicate work that demanded all the skills she had learned while risking exposure, if she made even small mistakes. Margaret's approach to Lord Henley was masterful in its subtlety. She began by expressing interest in his opinions on various political matters, gradually steering conversations toward topics that revealed his knowledge of military affairs. His responses demonstrated not only access to sensitive information, but a willingness to discuss such matters with insufficient regard for security. The crucial breakthrough came during a dinner party at the home of mutual friends. Margaret had positioned herself where she could observe Henley's interactions with other guests, and she noticed his particular attention to a man she recognized as a known foreign agent operating under diplomatic cover. "Lord Henley seems quite well informed about military matters," Margaret observed to Lady Pembroke, their hostess, speaking loudly enough for Henley to overhear. "I find such knowledge quite impressive in a gentleman." The compliment had its intended effect. Henley, flattered by what he perceived as feminine admiration for his expertise, began to elaborate on his access to information about troop dispositions and strategic planning. His indiscretions, made in the presence of the foreign agent, confirmed the intelligence that had initially aroused suspicion. Margaret's report to Lady Vesper was comprehensive and damning. Within days, Lord Henley found himself facing a choice between cooperation with British authorities and prosecution for treason. He chose cooperation, providing information about foreign attempts to recruit British officials, while ceasing his own treasonous activities. The successful completion of her first assignment earned Margaret a new level of respect from both Lady Vesper and Thornfield. More importantly, it confirmed her own confidence in her ability to navigate the dangerous world she had chosen to enter. "You have natural instincts for this work," Lady Vesper observed after reviewing Margaret's report. "But instincts must be tempered with experience and wisdom. Your next assignments will be more challenging, requiring you to venture deeper into the shadows where mistakes can prove fatal." Margaret accepted the warning with the seriousness it deserved, but she felt no desire to retreat from the path she had chosen. The conventional life of a duke's sister, with its prescribed roles and limited opportunities, now seemed like a prison she had escaped. In Lady Vesper's world, her intelligence and education were not ornaments to be displayed, but weapons to be wielded in service of her country. Her engagement to Thornfield was announced in the society papers with all the pomp expected of such an occasion. The Duke of Ravensholm, her brother, was delighted by the match, considering Thornfield a man of suitable fortune and reputation. Society approved of the union, seeing it as a proper alliance between established nobility and entrepreneurial success. Only Margaret and Thornfield knew that their engagement was as much a professional partnership as a romantic one, providing cover for activities that would protect England from threats both foreign and domestic. Their wedding, when it came, would mark not just the beginning of their married life, but the formal establishment of a team that would serve their country in ways that history books would never record. 6 months after the events at Pemberton House, London society had settled into new patterns shaped by the revelations that had shattered old certainties. The scandal had provided conversational fodder for countless dinner parties and drawing-room gatherings, with each retelling adding new layers of speculation and embellishment. Yet beneath the surface gossip, those with eyes to see understood that fundamental changes had occurred in the balance of power that governed their world. Margaret's wedding to Alexander Thornfield took place on a crisp October morning in the private chapel of Ravensholm House. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of traditional elegance, with all the pageantry expected of a union between two of society's most prominent figures. The Duke of Ravensholm walked his sister down the aisle, beaming with pride at the advantageous match she had made. The assembled guests represented the cream of London society, their presence lending legitimacy and importance to the occasion. Yet for those who knew how to interpret the subtle signs, the wedding ceremony contained elements that spoke to deeper meanings. Among the guests were individuals whose presence would have puzzled society observers, foreign diplomats whose official roles masked other activities, merchants whose businesses provided cover for intelligence operations, and society ladies whose charitable works concealed networks of information gathering. Lady Vesper herself attended, though disguised in the persona of a distant cousin from Scotland. Her silver mask had been replaced by the more conventional concealment of widow's weeds, but her crimson lips remained visible beneath the black veil. To most observers, she appeared to be merely another relative attending a family celebration. Only Margaret, Thornfield, and a select few others recognized the significance of her presence. The wedding vows that Margaret and Thornfield exchanged carried meanings that transcended their public declarations. When they promised to honor and protect each other through all the challenges life might bring, they were pledging loyalty not just to their marriage, but to the dangerous work they would undertake together. Their union represented the formal establishment of a partnership that would serve England's interests in ways both subtle and profound. The wedding reception, held in the grand ballroom of Ravensholm House, provided perfect cover for conversations that would have been impossible in any other setting. Diplomatic intelligence was exchanged over champagne toasts, strategic plans were discussed during waltz intermissions, and new alliances were forged through the seemingly innocent interactions of wedding guests. Margaret found herself observing the gathering with the trained eye she had developed under Lady Vesper's tutelage. She could see the hidden networks of influence and information that connected apparently unrelated individuals, the subtle negotiations that took place behind fans and flower arrangements, the careful positioning of guests that facilitated certain conversations while preventing others. As the evening wore on, Lady Vesper approached the newlyweds during a quiet moment between dances. Her congratulations appeared conventional to any casual observer, but her words carried deeper significance for those who understood her true identity. "Lady Thornfield," she said, using Margaret's new title for the first time. "Marriage marks not an ending but a beginning. The foundation you establish today will support endeavors that extend far beyond your personal happiness." Margaret understood that Lady Vesper was formally acknowledging her transition from student to partner. The mysterious woman who had first appeared at the masquerade ball was passing the torch to a new generation, trusting Margaret and Thornfield to continue the work of protecting England from threats both foreign and domestic. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a courier bearing news that required immediate attention. A ship had been intercepted attempting to land French agents on the English coast, and preliminary interrogation had revealed connections to networks they had been monitoring. The intelligence gathered from the Pemberton investigation had proven invaluable in identifying and neutralizing this new threat. Margaret's first instinct was to excuse herself and join the discussions of how to handle the situation, but Lady Vesper's subtle gesture reminded her that discretion remained paramount. The wedding celebration must continue without hint of the serious matters being addressed in private consultations. The months that followed the wedding brought a series of assignments that tested Margaret's skills and deepened her understanding of the complex world she now inhabited. Working alongside Thornfield, she infiltrated social circles suspected of harboring foreign sympathizers, gathered intelligence about commercial ventures that might be fronts for enemy operations, and helped identify British citizens whose financial difficulties made them vulnerable to foreign recruitment. One particularly challenging assignment involved a series of house parties at a country estate owned by Lord Blackwood, the same man who had hosted the masquerade where Margaret first encountered Lady Vesper. Intelligence suggested that Blackwood was using these gatherings to facilitate meetings between British officials and foreign agents, but proving such allegations required careful investigation. Margaret and Thornfield attended the house parties as newlyweds enjoying extended honeymoon travels, their presence appearing completely natural while providing cover for extensive intelligence gathering. The relaxed atmosphere of country house entertaining made guests more careless in their conversations, and the extended duration of such gatherings allowed time for thorough observation of who met with whom and when. The assignment proved successful beyond their initial expectations. Not only did they confirm Blackwood's treasonous activities, but they also uncovered a broader network of corruption that extended into multiple government departments. The intelligence they gathered led to a series of arrests and prosecutions that severely damaged foreign intelligence operations in England. Margaret's success in these endeavors earned her increasing independence in conducting operations. Lady Vesper gradually stepped back from direct involvement, content to provide guidance and support while allowing her protégé to develop her own methods and contacts. The transition was both exciting and daunting, as Margaret realized she was becoming the very sort of mysterious figure that Lady Vesper had been. The establishment of Margaret's own network of informants and agents became a priority that required all her social skills and psychological insight. She recruited allies from across London society, discontented servants who could observe their employers' activities, merchants who could monitor unusual commercial transactions, society ladies who could gather gossip and assess its significance for national security. Each recruitment required careful assessment of the individual's motivations, capabilities, and trustworthiness. Some were motivated by patriotism, others by financial incentives, and still others by the excitement of participating in activities that gave their otherwise conventional lives deeper meaning. Margaret learned to tailor her approach to each potential agent, offering them roles that matched their abilities while protecting them from exposure to information that could prove dangerous if discovered. The development of her network coincided with an increase in the sophistication of threats facing England. The end of the Napoleonic Wars had not brought peace, but rather a reshuffling of alliances and ambitions that created new challenges for British security. Commercial espionage became as important as military intelligence, and the growing complexity of international trade created opportunities for enemies to attack British interests through economic rather than military means. Margaret's unique position as Lady Thornfield provided access to information that would have been impossible for traditional intelligence operatives to obtain. Her husband's business interests created legitimate reasons for them to travel extensively, meet with foreign contacts, and maintain correspondence with individuals throughout Europe. Their social position opened doors to government officials, military officers, and influential civilians whose casual conversations often revealed more than they realized. The culmination of Margaret's transformation came during a crisis that threatened to expose the entire network Lady Vesper had spent years building. A double agent, motivated by greed rather than ideology, had begun selling information about British intelligence operations to multiple foreign powers. The betrayal threatened not only ongoing operations, but the lives of agents operating in hostile territory. Margaret's investigation of the security breach required her to use all the skills she had learned while operating under pressure that tested her resolve and ingenuity. Working with only a few trusted associates, she systematically reviewed every operation that had been compromised, looking for patterns that might identify the traitor. The breakthrough came through careful analysis of timing rather than dramatic confrontation. Margaret realized that information about certain operations had been leaked only after specific social gatherings where particular individuals had been present. Cross-referencing attendance lists with compromised dates revealed a pattern that pointed to a specific suspect. The confrontation with the double agent was conducted with the same subtlety that characterized all of Margaret's work. Rather than dramatic accusations, she arranged for the suspect to receive false information that could only have come from the same sources that had been compromised. When that false information appeared in foreign intelligence reports, the traitor's identity was confirmed beyond doubt. The resolution of the crisis established Margaret's reputation as a formidable intelligence operative in her own right. Lady Vesper, in what would be their final formal meeting, acknowledged that her protégé had surpassed even her expectations. "You have become something I never quite managed to be," Lady Vesper observed during their parting conversation. "I remained always an outsider, operating from the shadows and maintaining distance from the society I protected. You have achieved integration without compromise, becoming both a full participant in society and its guardian." The observation was both compliment and analysis. Margaret had indeed found ways to reconcile her intelligence work with her social position in ways that strengthened both rather than forcing choices between them. Her marriage to Thornfield provided both personal fulfillment and professional partnership. Her social connections served national interests while remaining genuine friendships, and her growing influence in society created opportunities to shape events rather than merely responding to them. As Lady Vesper prepared to depart for assignments that would take her beyond England's borders, she made a final request. "The network we have built requires someone to guide it, someone who understands both its potential and its responsibilities. Will you accept that role?" Margaret's acceptance marked her complete transformation from the Duke's sister, who had attended a masquerade ball seeking novelty, to a woman who wielded influence that extended far beyond her official social position. She had become Lady Vesper's successor, inheriting not just a network of agents and informants, but the responsibility for protecting England from threats that most citizens would never know existed. The final scene of Margaret's transformation took place in her private study at Thornfield Manor, the estate that had become the unofficial headquarters for intelligence operations across southern England. Surrounded by books that concealed secret compartments and paintings that hid encrypted messages, she reviewed reports from agents throughout Europe while maintaining correspondence with government officials who relied on her information without ever acknowledging the source. On her desk lay invitations to social gatherings that would provide cover for intelligence operations, letters requesting assistance with matters that range from commercial disputes to diplomatic negotiations, and coded messages that required immediate attention. Yet despite the serious nature of her responsibilities, Margaret felt a satisfaction that had been missing from her previous existence. She had found her true calling, not in the conventional role of wife and society hostess that had been expected of her, but in work that combined all her talents and training in service of causes larger than herself. The mask she wore was no longer the literal disguise that Lady Vesper had favored, but the perfectly maintained facade of a conventional society lady whose real work remained invisible to all but her most trusted associates. The sound of Thornfield's footsteps in the hallway announced his return from his latest assignment, and Margaret quickly secured the sensitive materials on her desk before rising to greet her husband and partner. Their embrace was both welcome home and briefing session, as they shared information about their respective activities, while maintaining the fiction of a conventional marriage for any servants who might observe them. "Any interesting developments while I was away?" Thornfield asked, his casual tone belying the serious nature of his inquiry. "Several items requiring attention," Margaret replied, her own voice equally casual. "Perhaps we might discuss them over dinner?" Their exchange exemplified the life they had built together. One where love and duty, personal fulfillment and national service, social conformity and secret rebellion existed in perfect harmony. They had become the guardians of a society that would never know their names or acknowledge their sacrifices, and they found in that anonymity a freedom that conventional recognition could never have provided. As evening fell over London, Margaret Thornfield, the woman who had once been merely Lady Margaret Ashworth, prepared for another night of work in the shadows that protected England's light. The mask that knew all the sins of nobility had been passed to new hands, and those hands would ensure that the secrets they guarded served justice rather than corruption, protection rather than exploitation. The story that had begun with a mysterious invitation to a masquerade ball had become the foundation for a new chapter in the hidden history of English intelligence operations. Lady Vesper was gone, but her work continued in the hands of those she had trained and trusted. The network of agents and informants that protected England from its enemies remained strong, guided by leaders who understood that the greatest service was that which could never be acknowledged. In the growing darkness, Margaret lit the candles in her study and returned to her work, ready to face whatever challenges the night might bring. The transformation was complete, and the future stretched ahead filled with possibilities for service that would shape history while remaining forever hidden from its pages.